Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment down below, and share it with your friends. Because if there was ever a time to talk about the importance of free speech and the government's role in controlling media, it's now. And this story, about ABC pulling Jimmy Kimmel off the air, absolutely demands attention. So let's dive right in. The story. On Wednesday night, something remarkable happened. ABC announced that Jimmy Kimmel Live would be pulled from the air indefinitely. This came just hours after Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, publicly called for Kimmel's suspension. His reasoning? Kimmel made a brief remark during his monologue about the circumstances surrounding the tragic murder of conservative influencer Charlie Kirk. Now, to clarify, Kimmel did not mock Kirk, nor did he celebrate his death. In fact, his first response after the shooting was a social media post expressing sympathy for the Kirk family and condemning gun violence. The offensive part? Kimmel speculated, incorrectly it turns out, that the shooter may have had ties to far-right extremism. That was it. One line, one observation, in the middle of a larger point. And yet, that was enough for Carr to demand Kimmel's removal. ABC quickly caved, issuing a statement that the show would be preempted indefinitely. Meanwhile, President Trump weighed in and called it great news for America. Because apparently, in his view, nothing says freedom like celebrating the silencing of a critic. Weaponizing a tragedy. Charlie Kirk's murder, which happened just 11 days ago, was undeniably tragic. No matter what you think of his politics, being killed for your beliefs is horrifying. And yet, what we've seen in the aftermath is not just grief, it's a coordinated effort to weaponize his death. Across workplaces and social media, people who expressed criticism of Kirk, or even mild commentary, have faced suspensions, firings, and online harassment. The Kimmel case is just the highest profile example, and it's important to note, the outrage wasn't organic. It was fueled and amplified by figures in conservative media, then escalated by direct threats from a government official. Brendan Carr's threats. Let's talk about Brendan Carr. On a right-wing podcast this week, Carr said of Kimmel's comments, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." He implied that broadcasters who continued airing Kimmel's show risked fines, loss of licenses, and serious regulatory trouble. That's not a subtle nudge, that's a mafia-style threat. Nice TV station you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. And the thing is, those threats worked. Nextstar, which owns or operates more than 200 local TV stations, quickly announced it would stop airing Kimmel's show. Sinclair, another major broadcaster, soon followed suit. Both companies just so happen to have pending business before the FCC that requires Carr's approval. Nextstar is trying to buy another massive network group that would expand its reach to 80% of U.S. households, well above the FCC's cap. So yes, they have every incentive to keep Carr happy. And what did Carr do after Kimmel was pulled? He celebrated. When reporters asked him for comment, he responded with memes. From The Office. Yes, the man responsible for pressuring broadcasters into censoring a comedian thought the best way to mark the occasion was with a Michael Scott gif. Which is maybe the most depressing possible outcome of both authoritarianism and pop culture. The First Amendment problem. Here's the bottom line. This is not just about Jimmy Kimmel. This is about government officials using their power to coerce private companies into censoring speech. And that, very plainly, is a violation of the First Amendment. The FCC does have limited authority over what's called news distortion on broadcast TV, but that standard is so high it basically never applies. You'd have to prove that a broadcaster knowingly and deliberately falsified news in a way that harms the public. Simple mistakes, speculation, or even bias don't qualify. Kimmel's offhand remark about the shooter's potential ideology? That doesn't come close to meeting that bar. But Carr isn't actually trying to win in court. He doesn't need to. Just the threat of FCC action is enough to scare broadcasters into compliance, especially when those same broadcasters are begging the FCC for favors. The hypocrisy of broadcasters. And let's not forget, Sinclair itself has a history of pushing out wild, conspiratorial commentary on its stations. One of their regular contributors has floated theories about drone attacks being part of a deep state plot and suggested that a student was secretly tied to terrorist planning. By Carr's own supposed standard, Sinclair would be guilty of news distortion every other Tuesday. Yet somehow, that never seems to merit a crackdown. Funny how that works. Historical parallels. If all of this feels unprecedented in the United States, that's because it is. But it's not unprecedented elsewhere. In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán gradually seized control of the media by passing vague laws about balance and punishing outlets that didn't toe the government line. In Russia, Vladimir Putin's rise to power included shutting down independent TV shows that mocked him, most famously a satirical puppet show that drove him to fury. Authoritarians always go after the comedians and satirists first, because ridicule is powerful. And once they succeed, they rarely stop there. Even Ted Cruz thinks it's bad. And here's how you know things have gone too far. Even Ted Cruz has raised concerns. On his podcast, Cruz said he was thrilled that Kimmel was suspended, but admitted that the government punishing speech it doesn't like sets a dangerous precedent, one that could easily backfire on conservatives. And he's right. If Democrats used FCC threats to push Fox News off the air, conservatives would be outraged. So this is not about ideology. This is about whether the government gets to decide which comedians, journalists, or critics are allowed to speak. Disney's role. Now let's talk about ABC's parent company, Disney. They had a choice here: stand up to political pressure or cave. And they caved. Which is a problem, because when history looks back at moments like this, it won't just remember the people making threats, it'll remember the corporations that rolled over instead of fighting back. Disney has the resources to fight this in court. In fact, they would almost certainly win. Just last year, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that government officials cannot coerce private companies into suppressing speech they don't like. That's this Supreme Court. Even that one. So Disney has the law on its side. What it doesn't seem to have is the backbone. Why this matters? The Kimmel suspension is not the end of the story, it's the beginning. Trump has already said publicly that NBC should cancel its other late-night hosts, calling them losers. Carr has hinted that The View could be targeted next. This is how censorship spreads, one show at a time, until dissenting voices are gone. And while some might dismiss this as just comedy, that misses the point. Late-night shows, satire, and commentary are part of a free society. If the government can silence a comedian on broadcast TV, it can silence journalists, commentators, and eventually, anyone. The call to action. So, what can be done? Ideally, Congress should step in and limit the FCC's ability to use licensing power as a weapon against content. But in the meantime, Disney has to decide whether it stands for free expression or political convenience. An audience have a role to. If you care about this, you can pressure Disney. Cancel Disney Plus or Hulu and make it clear why. Write, caving to government censorship in the cancellation box. And maybe also write, stop ignoring Donald Duck's corkscrew anatomy. Just to keep them on their toes. Direct to Bob Iger. And since I still have this platform, I'd like to address Disney CEO Bob Iger directly. Bob, history is watching. And history is not kind to cowards. Every time you give in to political bullies, you only embolden them to demand more. The question is not whether they'll come back. They will. The question is whether you'll have the courage to stand up and say, "You make me." So, to recap, Jimmy Kimmel didn't mock Charlie Kirk's death. Brendan Carr used threats to pressure broadcasters. ABC caved. Trump cheered. And the First Amendment got stomped on by a government that's decided satire is too dangerous to allow. This isn't just about one late-night host. It's about whether we allow political leaders to dictate what can and cannot be said on television. And if we don't stand up now, when will we? So once again, please like, comment, and share this video. Because freedom of speech only works if people are willing to fight for it. Thank you for being here tonight.